Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everyone. We'll get started now. Our first speaker this morning is Professor Deirdre McCloskey, who is a distinguished professor of economics, history, English, and communications at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She's written 17 books and around 400 scholarly articles, which is far more than I've even read. And she's known as a, quote, conservative Chicago school-style economist, but says that she is, as a quote from her website, a literary, quantitative, postmodern, free market, progressive Episcopalian, Midwestern woman from Boston who was once a man. Not conservative, I'm a Christian libertarian. Now, I first learned of Professor McCloskey through her work on statistical testing in the 1990s, when, along with her co-author, Stephen Ziliak, she pointed out to that economists, even at the very highest levels, had a disturbing tendency to confuse statistical significance with actual meaning. And she called this asterisk economics, a reference to the convention of putting asterisks to signify that you have a statistically significant regression result. And learning that statistical significance was not necessarily especially significant was at first very comforting to a PhD student whose dissertation was not generating any asterisks. But it was slightly less comforting once I realized how much easier it is to get asterisks than to get truly meaningful results. But still, her lesson about paying attention to the actual message the data is or are not telling you is one that stuck with me, even if I, too, sometimes catch myself playing asterisk economics. And for those of you who don't do empirical research, though I can't imagine why that would be true for anyone, that might sound esoteric, but it's part of the theme that runs through all of her work, a search for true meanings and thus real explanations for things like economic growth, society, and who we are rather than simplistic or generally accepted explanations. No asterisk research, look for the real meaning. And you see that throughout her trilogy, which will be the basis for her talk today, and her latest book being Bourgeois Equality, How Ideas, Not Capital or Institutions, Enrich the World, where she argues that the accidents of Reformation and revolt in Northwestern Europe between 1517 and 1789 led to liberty and dignity for commoners, and that these ideas, which became called liberalism, led in turn to an explosion in wealth and standard of living. So we're thrilled to have Professor McCloskey here to kick off this year's Aspen Forum with her talk, How We Got Rich, A Liberal Climate of Ideas.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you very much. I have a terrible cold, as you can hear, and my voice is not, shall we say, attractive at the best of times. So you'll have to either tolerate it. I also stutter on top of everything else, although I earn my living by talking, so it can't be that bad. So you either grow accustomed to my sonority or run screaming from the room. I don't care. It's a free country. And that's my theme. That you are all, almost everyone here is a practical person. You're interested in innovation and technology, where, as they say in country music, the rubber meets the road. And that's, I honor you. And yes, go to it. Make that rubber meet the road. I'm a historian, an economist, kind of a philosopher. I've been paid to teach philosophy, so I suppose I'm a philosopher too. And I'm going to give you this morning a long historical perspective on what you do. And the long historical perspective is not hard to enunciate. It's that we are rich. Now, by we, I mean easily half of humankind now, and with every prospect in the next 50 or 100 years of everyone on the planet having an American or Japanese standard of living. You can see that I'm an optimist about the future of technology, about its spread, and about the consequent enormous increase in the physical welfare, the material welfare of people, and also their spiritual welfare. I do not think that being rich is necessarily or inevitably spiritually corrupting. You hear that from both the left and the right. It's the theological basis of the environmental movement, for example, and I think it's wrong. So here are the facts. In 1800, worldwide, the average human, with very few exceptions, a few lords and priests, and that's about it, maybe a couple of merchants, earned and spent about $3 a day in modern prices. Now, I can tell you it'd be really hard to live in Aspen on $3 a day. 300 is more like it. Yet, even today, a substantial part of the world's population, although a part that is falling in absolute and relative terms like a stone, and has fallen more in the last 30 years than in the history of the world, $3 a day is really rough. And yet now, in the United States and Sweden, and, France, even Botswana, income per head is on the order, in real terms, correcting for inflation, etc., of $100 a day. In the United States, it's about $130 a day. The average in the world of income per head is Brazil. If you want to have a vision of what the average person on the planet makes, earns, and spends, it's the $33 a day in purchasing power corrected terms of the average Brazilian. That was the income of the United States per head in 1940. So it's not true, as you will have heard from my friend Bob Gordon and lots of other pessimists, that we are slowing down, that we're doomed. For some reason that I've never understood, people love to hear that the sky is falling. You sell books. If you write a book that has the word America in the title, that says the world is coming to an end, you will sell a lot of books. So it's just some advice if you should ever think of doing it. It's free. No extra charge. So that's the empirical puzzle. That's what we need to understand, because it had never remotely happened before. The increase since 1800 of, say, a country like Germany in income per head is on the order of 3,000%. Approximately. I know that fourth grade arithmetic would have to adjust it slightly, but it's a factor of 30. And all previous enrichments, Song China in the Middle Ages, our Middle Ages, the European Middle Ages, or the invention of the Mediterranean wheat and oil economy around 700 BCE, or the century or so of peace of the good emperors in Rome, or they experienced increases of 100%, and then it slipped back to $3 a day in all these places. Whereas it has no prospect of slipping back to $3 a day in our time. And it's 3,000%, not 100%. So that's the explicandum, as we excellent Latin scholars say. It's the thing to be explained. How to explain it? Well, the usual explanations, which I treat in some detail, in excruciating detail, middle of these 3 books, which, by the way, are available on Amazon cheap. And a month ago, they were all now available in audio books. The company doing the audiobook said, we have this great guy, this man, who will read your books. And I said, no way, Jose, it's got to be a woman. And sure enough, it is. There in that middle book called Bourgeois Dignity, Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World, I go through all the explanations, 30 or 40 of them. Coal, investment, imperial exploitation, all the popular explanations. And I conclude with blindingly persuasive economic and historical analysis that they don't work. Even if you were to add them together in a big pile, they wouldn't work. Because they're too little. The economists in the room will understand me if I say the Harburger triangles are small. And they're small one after another. It's not foreign trade. Trade is an engine of growth. That doesn't work. It's not this, it's not that. It's not the Protestant Reformation. Max Weber, I have an article coming out in the Reason magazine next month that goes after Uncle Max. It's not all the things that people have said. In a word, it's liberty. It's liberalism. As Adam Smith said, it's the liberal plan of equality, dignity, and justice, by which he meant social equality, economic liberty, and legal equality before the courts of the state. And Adam Smith had no idea of the magnitude that this liberalism, which was coming to the minds, the advanced minds of Europe in a big way in the 18th century, century before such a declaration would have seemed absurd. Equality of social standing, how ridiculous. On the scaffold, Charles I gave a speech, and he said, don't you understand? A sovereign and a subject are clean different things. By the late 18th century, among advanced intellectuals like Mary Wollstonecraft and Tom Paine, that was sounding absurd. The hierarchies were breaking down. Now understand, I'm not saying that suddenly in 1800, Northwestern Europe and its offshoots, such as what became the United States, were perfect liberal paradises. After all, we in the United States had slaves until 1865, and that half of the population called women had very few rights. I'm just reading an excellent biography of Thoreau, and learned from that what I think I knew, except among Quakers, is that women had no right to speak in public, period. Now, why do I think that this liberalism, which is, by the way, the proper way of using the word, the way our friends on the left call themselves liberals is quite absurd. For the most part, they're not. They're interested in pushing people around in various ways, so for their good, I understand. Why would that be so much more important than coal or trade or empire or these other things that I attack? Well, it's very simple. For an innovative society, you've got to have lots of people trying stuff out. Lots of people. You can't confine it to MIT graduates or professors of economics, or well, they're not very innovative, but to a small group. It won't work. You've got to have, well, actually, Thoreau is a strange example. Thoreau's father had founded a firm making pencils. We're talking about the 1820s and 30s here. Henry David Thoreau reverse engineered the excellent French pencils of the day. The advantage of a pencil is you don't need to have an inkwell and to have a quill and so on. You can just write. And so this fellow Thoreau, who we know as for civil disobedience in Walden, was in fact an inventor. He was allowed to invent. In the English phrase that one hears a lot, people were allowed to have a go. Have a go. And they hadn't been before. Leonardo kept his notebooks secret and wrote them as though in a mirror because the word innovation in English until the 19th century was a bad word. We love innovation. Everyone in this room says, innovation, yay. But innovation was going to disturb the hierarchies. It was going to let women speak, let people of color have a go, let colonial people free. In fact, I think of myself not as a conservative, as the press is liable to label free market people like me. And here's how you tell the difference between a conservative and a liberal. The conservative views the 1960s as the beginning of the rut. The women came out of the kitchen, the gays came out of the closet, the colonial people threw off their masters. Hierarchy, order, oh no, how terrible. If that's how you feel, then you're a conservative. But if you're a liberal like me, then you say, no, this was the great decade in the lives of the older people here of liberation. Now, so far as your own interest in technology is concerned, you've heard, as I said, from Bob Gordon that American technology is slowing, technological innovation is slowing down, which I don't believe, and that we're all doomed. And the trouble with that way of looking at the world is it doesn't look at the world. It doesn't look at the whole world. It would be much harder for me to make the case in these three books that what we ordinarily and foolishly call capitalism is actually a very good system for organizing society, liberal capitalism, not some of the alternatives. It'd be much harder for me to make this case if China first in 1978 and then India in 1990 had not shifted, at least in their economies, in the Chinese case, to liberalism, allowing people to have a go. Now, I know it's crony capitalism and so on in China, and it's not a perfect free market economy, but it's a heck of a lot better than backyard blast furnaces and collectivized agriculture and the great leap forward in the Cultural Revolution. Anyone here who's been to China comes back stunned. I know I did. I went there for the first time last year. And if you're a socialist, if you're inclined to think, well, the government's the best way to run the economy, then you need to go to Shanghai. And you need to see that when the Communist Party started doing its moderately important job of platting the land and making streets and sewers, and then allowing private entrepreneurs to build the buildings for profit, Shanghai exploded. I have a friend, a colleague at Fudan University there, who, when he came as a student in 1981, noted that there were 2 high-rise buildings, really substantial high-rise buildings in Shanghai. Now there are 2,000. 2,000. So letting people be, laissez-faire, laissez-passer, is the best policy. In other words, the best policy is not to have a policy. The best policy is not to have an industrial policy, or wise heads in Washington or Springfield choosing winners. That's not how to do it. What the wise heads in Washington and Springfield should be doing is helping make the conditions for a free society. In the history of the United States, when the government has performed a positive role, it's mainly been about freeing people. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 and 1964, I got that, 64, 65, I guess, were very important leaps into a society where all men and women, dear, are created equal. So that's my theme. It's easy to explain. Look, if you can't explain your idea in your book in one sentence as the elevator goes up, you don't understand it very well. And I can get you to the second floor by merely saying that what made us rich was being free. Look, you can make the case that certain Matsukato, for example, I think she's still at MIT, has this crazy book saying that the government was crucial for innovations in the United States. And one of her pieces of evidence is that one inventor got an NSF grant when he was a graduate student to support himself. And that's supposed to say, aha, you see, his innovation came from the government. No, it didn't. Innovations come from human creativity. Innovations come from your mind and your mind and your mind, trying it out. Now, there's one important coda here, one important additional requirement. You can't just have a creative society where every 1,000 flowers bloom and everyone has a new idea and they try it out. No. The ideas have to be tested by a market test. Now, in certain cases of government investment, of the sorts I approve of, it has to be a virtual market test. Is Yellowstone Park, all things considered, a good social idea? Consider the opportunity cost of Yellowstone Park, and you look at how much people would pay if for the existence value, even if they don't ever visit the park, and you add it all up and do a cost-benefit study in aid of this government action. But most innovations, the kind that most of you are concerned with, have to pay their way. If they don't pay their way, the innovation is what would be the opposite of innovation, is a retrogression. Income per head is going down if you insist on every crazy idea. Look, right now I could start speaking to you in Dutch. 88 prachtige grachten. Denken aan Holland, zie ik brede rivieren. Now, I don't want you to get the impression that I actually know any Dutch. That's not true. But if I could speak to you in Dutch. And that would be an innovation. But for most of the people in the room, it would be a stupid innovation. Not all ideas are good. And the sensible test to see if people are getting better off, it shouldn't be the only test. I'm not a barbarian who thinks that we shouldn't ever subsidize opera, although maybe that's a little bit questionable. But I'm not a barbarian. I think everyone in this room ought to pay for free K through 12 education. But that doesn't imply that the state, local or national, should pay for it. I mean, should not pay for it, should supply it. They should tax us to pay the way of children to private schools. But the underlying test for most goods and services has to be, do they earn profit? Now, of course, if you do a survey of ordinary Americans and ask them what the share of profit in national income is, they'll say 50%. Now, any of the entrepreneurs here would be pleased to get 50%, but it ain't true. It's more like 15%. And you can't keep on, as the senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, would like to do, moving more and more towards France and putting more and more burden on these rich capitalists. But profit is the test, and it was the test that was applied when mercantilism, when the idea that the government needed to be involved in every economic decision finally died in the face of Voltaire and Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, and all the greats. Henry David Thoreau, for example. All right, so liberalism is the way forward. And what we should all be trying to do is to increase the freedoms of people in our societies. Look, I come from Chicago. Large parts of the south and west sides of Chicago are terribly poor and terribly disorganized and unhappy. They should be hives of industrial activity. In the 19th century, when you had poor people, they got jobs. They might not have been nice academic jobs with tenure, but they were jobs. And then their children got to go to school. And we had the factor of 30. What's stopping the south and west sides? The war on drugs is stopping it, turning parts of the south and west side into free fire zones as the gangs fight among each other. The zoning is an obstacle to making the south and west side into hives of industrial activity. Oh no, don't do that. You've got to get your alderman to approve of this new factory you intend. The minimum wage. If a kid off the streets on the west side of Chicago is worth only $5 an hour to start with, that's what he should be paid. This crazy idea to raise his wage to $15 means that he won't be employed at all. 1/4 of the French young people not in school under 25 years are unemployed. In South Africa, a country I know and love, it's much, much worse. So, in fact, worldwide, these job protections, so-called, are creating a dangerous mass of unemployed youth in Spain and Greece, in South Africa and France. So that's my story. Let my people go. That's the one-sentence formula for economic growth. Thank you.